She had imagined walking down the aisle 1,000 times. In every version, her heart was light, her eyes locked on the man waiting at the altar, and the future felt like a sunrise just for them. But no version of that dream included overhearing what she just did just 30 minutes before saying I do. Amelia Clark stood frozen in the corridor of the St. Helena Grand Hotel, her hand still clutching the veil she had returned to retrieve. Her body didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't well up. Instead, her mind replayed every word she had just heard from the room adjacent to the bridal suite. The voice was unmistakable. Nathaniel Rhodes, her fiancé, the man she had defended countless times against whispers and doubts. The man she had loved. He wasn't alone. His lifelong friend, Lucas Vaughn, was with him. They had been speaking freely, unaware of the paper-thin wall between them and the hallway. At first, it was harmless banter, nerves laughter. Then came the sentence that shattered her illusions like glass underfoot. She's perfect for this phase. PR loves her. She makes me look stable. Investors eat it up. Once the IPO's done, we can realign quietly. Realign. Such a clean corporate word for replacing her. Lucas had tried to interject his tone, uncertain, but Nathaniel had continued. This wedding is the final piece, its optics. Vow Connect has built itself on the image of commitment. The irony isn't lost on me. That was when Amelia stopped breathing for a moment. She didn't want to hear more, but her feet refused to move. What else was he hiding? How long had this been strategy rather than sincerity? She's good at looking devoted, he said next. And let's be honest, she's easy to manage. She's never going to question the script. The veil slipped from her fingers. A few steps down the hallway, Kara, her best friend and maid of honor, was still chatting with one of the planners. She hadn't heard. No one had. Amelia bent down slowly to retrieve the veil. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. What washed over her wasn't pain. It was clarity, cold, surgical. She rose to her feet with a new stillness in her posture. The wedding clock was still ticking. The string quartet was warming up downstairs. The guests were seated. The dress was steamed and waiting. But the woman who would wear it no longer existed. This wasn't the end of a love story. It was the beginning of something far more honest. She didn't storm into the room. She didn't confront Nathaniel. She turned, walked quietly back toward her suite, and closed the door behind her. Inside, everything remained untouched: roses, arranged champagne on ice, her gown hanging like a promise. She looked at her reflection and saw not a heartbroken bride, but a woman standing on the edge of reinvention. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about reclaiming the narrative. Amelia sat down at the vanity table, took a deep breath, and opened her phone. She had a few messages to send. The next hour would determine everything. Not just for her, but for the man who thought she would stay silent, who thought she was easy to manage, who never imagined she'd have the strength to rewrite the ending. Because sometimes a betrayal isn't a breakdown. Sometimes it's the blueprint for a better beginning. Amelia Clark had never been the kind of woman people expected to end up with a billionaire. Raised in a modest suburb outside Portland, Oregon, she had grown up with practical dreams, art school, a quiet life designing interiors, maybe a dog and a cozy apartment with sunlit windows. Her parents, both teachers, passed away when she was in college, leaving her with student loans, a well-worn recipe book, and a quiet kind of resilience that never sought attention. She had moved to San Francisco, not to find love but to rebuild. After a brutal breakup and a failed design partnership, Amelia spent her days freelancing and nights sketching floor plans that never got approved. Then came a client who changed everything, Nathaniel Rhodes. At the time, he was just launching Vow Connect, a sleek matchmaking app designed to appeal to millennials who wanted marriage but not drama. He needed someone to redesign the company's new downtown office space. Amelia was hesitant. His reputation preceded him, charismatic, ruthless, and notoriously uninterested in anything resembling permanence. But the money was good, and she needed a win. Their first meeting was not romantic. He was late, distracted, and barely looked at her presentation. She expected to be dismissed like a dozen other contractors. But something shifted halfway through. He asked about her hand-drawn layouts, not the digital ones. He looked at her sketches like they were maps to something he didn't yet understand. That was the first time she saw the version of Nathaniel he showed only to her. For months, their relationship remained professional, though the air between them tightened with every meeting. A missed dinner led to a late-night apology call. A rushed design deadline turned into breakfast on his penthouse balcony. He called her stubborn. She called him arrogant. Somehow, in the mess of growing headlines and investor meetings, they became inseparable. To the world, they were opposites. She was grounded, thoughtful, and unknown. He was impulsive, dazzling, and constantly photographed. But it worked, at least it looked like it did. The first time he told her he loved her, they were at a beach house in Carmel. She had spent hours rearranging driftwood and candles for a magazine shoot, annoyed he hadn't shown up earlier. He stood barefoot in the doorway and said it like a fact he'd known forever. Amelia didn't answer right away. Part of her always questioned if a man like Nathaniel could truly love someone like her, someone who didn't play the game. But he made her feel seen, and for a while that was enough. When he proposed, it wasn't over the top. No drones, no choreographed flash mob. Just a ring on a plate of lemon tart during a quiet dinner at her favorite garden cafe. He said he wanted forever, and she believed him. Not because of the ring, but because he had started to open up about his father's obsession with legacy, about the pressure to scale fast, marry well, look perfect. He said she was his anchor. And Amelia, ever the believer in slow love, let herself think maybe fairy tales just had new settings now. The wedding planning was surreal. Vogue wanted a spread. TechCrunch called it the merger of the year. Vow Connect's engagement surged. Invitations were sent to politicians, influencers, tech founders. Amelia's guest list was shorter. Kara, her roommate from college. Mrs. Grant, her high school art teacher. A handful of clients who had become friends. She didn't want glitter or spectacle. She wanted authenticity. But somewhere along the way, the authenticity blurred. She found herself approving seating charts made by PR teams. Her dress was selected by a stylist she didn't hire. The vows were ghostwritten by someone from Nathaniel's branding agency. It's just easier, he told her once. We're building something big. Let the team handle the details. And slowly, Amelia started fading from her own wedding. The woman she saw in the mirror looked beautiful, styled, composed, but behind her eyes, a small voice kept whispering, "Do you still belong in this story?" That voice had grown louder over the last month. Nathaniel was more distant, glued to his phone, missing tastings, arriving late to fittings. When she asked if something was wrong, he kissed her forehead and told her not to overthink. "We're almost there," he would say. After the launch, it's just us. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to be wrong. But standing outside that hotel room, hearing those words, Amelia finally understood. She had never been a partner. She had been a pitch, a polished detail in someone else's campaign. And in 30 minutes, she was expected to walk into a ceremony that would seal her place in a lie. Except she wouldn't. Not today, not ever. The final 30 minutes before a wedding are usually filled with soft laughter, quick mirror checks, and last-minute lipstick touches. But inside Amelia's suite, the atmosphere was quiet, calculated, and electric, with unspoken resolve. Kara was there, fussing with the bouquet, and not yet aware of the storm her best friend was preparing to walk into. Amelia didn't say much. She moved deliberately, her movements smooth, but filled with a tension Kara couldn't place. The wedding planner popped in chirping about the timeline, but Amelia only nodded. Her mind was elsewhere. She had already made her decision. The dress still hung in its protective cover. The veil she had retrieved was now folded on the chair. Instead, Amelia walked to her overnight bag and unzipped a separate garment bag. Inside was a sleek black jumpsuit with satin trim, simple, powerful, and entirely unplanned. Kara turned confused. "That's not your wedding dress, I know." Kara blinked. "Are you?" Amelia nodded. "I need you to trust me. I'm about to do something that might look insane, but it's the most honest thing I've ever done." Kara's eyes narrowed the same way they always did when she was trying to put puzzle pieces together. "This is about Nathaniel, isn't it? You heard something." Amelia didn't deny it. "I heard everything. I know the real reason for this wedding." Kara's expression shifted from confusion to fury. "Tell me what to do. I'm with you, always." Amelia exhaled slowly. She didn't cry. She couldn't. She had cried too many times over men who looked at her like an asset, a solution, a reflection of their image. Not this time. This time she would speak, before anyone could rewrite the script for her. Downstairs, the ceremony was already in motion. Guests had taken their seats. The string quartet played the melody Nathaniel insisted on, a classical arrangement he claimed evoked timeless elegance. In reality, Amelia now suspected it was another borrowed aesthetic, another box checked for appearances. Nathaniel waited at the altar, polished and composed, shaking hands with venture capitalists and smiling for discreetly positioned cameras. His mother beamed in the front row, her posture perfect, her smile controlled. She had never liked Amelia, always too polite, too poised, too careful, always watching, measuring. Kara slipped out, first her phone in hand, doing exactly what Amelia asked, discreetly messaging the media outlets that had RSVP'd. She sent them a simple note. "Stay through the ceremony. You'll want to see this." Amelia stood alone for a moment, looking at herself in the mirror. Her jumpsuit fit like armor. Her hair swept into a low chignon, framed her face with softness, but her eyes held no doubt. She slipped a flash drive into her pocket, along with a folded page she had printed from Nathaniel's Slack messages screenshots that told a fuller story than she ever expected to discover. She had pulled the files late last night using the shared team login she had long forgotten was still active on her tablet. Nathaniel had become careless, or maybe arrogant, or maybe he simply never believed she was capable of fighting back. Outside the doors of the grand ballroom, the coordinator smiled. "Ready?" Amelia nodded. "Yes, but I'm not walking down the aisle." The woman looked confused, But before she could question, the doors opened. The music swelled, heads turned, and Amelia stepped forward alone, not as a bride, but as a woman, with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. The guests whispered. Her black outfit drew attention immediately. Cameras clicked. Nathaniel's smile faltered. Amelia took steady steps toward the front, pausing just a few feet from where he stood. There was no priest, no vows, no music now. Just silence that pressed on every corner of the room. Amelia turned to the guests. I want to thank everyone for coming. I know this isn't what you expected, but I need to share something with you, something I heard 30 minutes ago. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the printed page, and handed it to the event videographer, who was already streaming live. Her voice didn't shake. What you're about to read and hear may shock you. It did me. This wasn't a wedding, it was a transaction, a PR stunt, a carefully orchestrated lie that I nearly played a starring role in. But I won't pretend. I won't recite words that were written by someone else. I won't marry a man who refers to me as a strategy. Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice low. Amelia, we can talk. Not now, you've had your time. This is mine. She turned back to the crowd. I may not be rich, I may not be powerful, but I have something more valuable, my voice. And I'm choosing to use it, right now, today. Kara emerged at the back of the room holding up her phone. The stream had gone viral in minutes. Hashtags were already trending. Vow unspoken. Amelia continued. This company, Vow Connect, was built on the idea of genuine connection. But behind the curtain, it's manipulation, image control, market performance over meaning. I believed in Nathaniel because I wanted to, because he showed me just enough to feel seen. But loving someone who sees you as a means to an end is not love. It's exploitation dressed in promises. Reporters were already rising. Guests looked stunned, some embarrassed. Nathaniel stood motionless, jaw tight. Amelia faced him one last time. You could have told the truth. You could have chosen authenticity, but you chose performance. So I'm giving the audience a better story, one that's real. She stepped down from the platform, walked through the center aisle, and didn't look back. Kara joined her at the door. Outside, the crisp wine country air welcomed her like a new chapter. Guests began murmuring, phones buzzing with alerts and headlines. Nathaniel remained behind a puppet without a stage. Amelia removed the flash drive from her pocket, handing it to a journalist already sprinting toward her. There's more. Financial records, Slack logs, internal memos. It's all yours. Use it wisely. And with that, she walked down the steps, past the floral arrangements, past the photographers, past the fantasy. No car, no entourage. Just Kara beside her and the quiet pride of someone who had not only escaped a lie, but turned it into liberation. Because the real vow she made that day wasn't to a man, it was to herself, and she had finally kept it. The silence that followed Amelia's exit was louder than any outburst. Inside the ballroom, guests remained seated in stunned disbelief. Some looked down, avoiding eye contact. Others whispered, scrolling through their phones as the livestream replayed Amelia's speech in real time. Nathaniel stood frozen, jaw-clenched eyes unfocused. He didn't chase her. He didn't call out her name. He simply turned, walked off the platform, and headed into a side room, followed by his assistant and 2 members of his PR team, who were already whispering damage control strategies. But what they hadn't expected was the sheer force of public reaction. Within an hour, Amelia's speech had gone viral. clips circulated with captions like, "She said no to a billionaire and walked away with her soul," or "the realest wedding that never happened." Twitter was ablaze. TikTok accounts turned her words into audio trends. News outlets called it a cultural moment. But this wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. Nathaniel's investors, previously enamored with the fairy tale romance narrative, used to boost the Vow Connect brand, were now calling emergency meetings. Stock prices dipped. Tech journalists began requesting statements. The board demanded answers, and then came the leak. The flash drive Amelia handed off contained more than damning Slack messages. It held full records of internal communications, showing Nathaniel and Lucas crafting the Amelia narrative as part of a larger campaign. She was positioned as the face of sincerity, a woman with no ties to wealth, no thirst for fame, no scandals. She was perfect, not for love, for marketing. Documents outlined how engagement milestones were timed with press cycles. Even private moments like their proposal and vacation photos were pre-scheduled for strategic releases. Amelia had unknowingly become part of a content calendar. But the most incriminating files revealed plans for her quiet exit. Just months after the company went public, Nathaniel had outlined options with his legal team about dissolving the marriage with minimal reputational impact, complete with talking points and an NDA draft. It was betrayal not only of love, but of human dignity. When this surfaced, the shift was immediate. News anchors debated whether the modern tech world had finally gone too far. Ethics professors called it emotional commodification. Feminist publications called Amelia a symbol of resistance against performative romance. But for Amelia, none of this played out in front of her. She had returned to Oregon within 24 hours. No interviews, no statements, no gloating, just silence. She rented a quiet cabin 2 hours from her hometown, surrounded by pine trees and a lake that reflected the sky with more honesty than Nathaniel ever had. Kara stayed for the first week, helping Amelia settle in, answering media inquiries on her behalf, and protecting her peace like a bodyguard of the soul. Amelia didn't follow the headlines, but she did begin to write. It started as a letter to herself, then to her younger self, then to any woman who had ever mistaken manipulation for love. Her words were never angry, just clear, clean, true. One morning she received a message from a former Vow Connect employee who had been watching quietly from the sidelines. Her name was Elise, and she thanked Amelia for giving her the courage to speak. She had her own files, her own story. Together they connected with a nonprofit that focused on emotional exploitation in high-pressure industries. That nonprofit later partnered with Amelia to launch a program called Rebuild Her Dedicated to helping women recover from psychological and financial abuse inside relationships that wore the mask of success. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's world crumbled faster than he anticipated. The board suspended him, investors withdrew, his legal team resigned. The company's IPO was delayed indefinitely, and though he released a public apology video, it only further confirmed his tone-deaf detachment. In the video, he sat in a minimalist office, dressed down, speaking softly. But people weren't interested in apologies framed by branding consultants. They were looking at Amelia, wondering where she had gone, wanting to know what would come next. But Amelia wasn't planning a return. She wasn't looking to capitalize. Her intention had never been vengeance, it had been truth. And now that it had been spoken, She needed space to remember who she had been before the lights, the expectations, the costume of the perfect bride. In the quiet mornings, she walked the lakeside trail, sometimes alone, sometimes with Kara. They spoke of everything and nothing. The way the air felt different when you stopped pretending. The way grief could arrive without tears. One day, while unpacking boxes she hadn't opened in years, Amelia found a forgotten sketch pad. Inside were designs she had drawn in her first year of college. One page showed a small communal art space. Natural wood open beams, windows wide enough to let in light even on cloudy days. She smiled, remembering that version of herself, the one who believed spaces could heal people. That afternoon, she called Kara. "I want to build it. The sketch, the studio, something real." Kara didn't hesitate. "I'm in." They found a property outside Ashland, an old barn, once used for weddings. The irony made them laugh. Over the next few months, with help from local builders and volunteers, they transformed it into a space for workshops, healing retreats, and art therapy. The first program hosted 8 women. Each one carried her own version of Amelia's story. Some had left controlling relationships. Others had walked away from public lives that demanded silence. They painted, they cooked, they cried, and slowly they rebuilt. Word of mouth spread. Rebuild Her expanded. Donations came in from unexpected places. One arrived anonymously with a note. "Thank you for choosing yourself. You showed us all we can too." Amelia never discovered who sent it. She didn't need to. Every time she watched a woman step into that space, shoulders relaxed, voice steadier, she knew the work mattered. And not because it was public, but because it was personal. One evening, sitting outside the barn as the sun dipped below the tree line, Kara asked her, "Do you ever think about him?" Nathaniel Amelia didn't answer right away. Then she said softly, "Not in the way I used to. I don't think of what he did. I think of who I became because of it." Kara smiled, then looked up as a car pulled into the gravel driveway. A familiar one. Leo Whitmore stepped out, dust on his jeans, clipboard in hand. He had been volunteering on weekends helping with renovations. An old friend from Amelia's university days, Leo had always been steady, quiet, thoughtful. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He didn't speak in promises, just actions. Over time, their conversations deepened. Shared silences turned into shared dinners. Inside jokes returned like forgotten songs. Kara, ever the observer, nudged Amelia one evening. "You trust him, don't you?" Amelia nodded. "I do." And that, after everything, was more than enough. Because truth once found had a way of attracting its own kind. And healing once chosen never truly stopped. It just changed shape. Like love, like courage, like Amelia herself. The first public reappearance of Amelia Clark happened quietly and without fanfare. It wasn't at a press conference or a talk show. It was on a fall afternoon in Portland at a panel discussion about ethical storytelling in digital media. She hadn't planned to speak. She had attended to support Kara, who had been invited as a guest speaker for her advocacy work with Rebuild Her. But halfway through the session, one of the panelists brought up a familiar case, the Vow Connect scandal, and posed a question to the audience. How do we rebuild public trust in platforms built on illusion? The room hushed. The moderator looked around. Then she noticed Amelia sitting in the third row. A quiet murmur followed, and slowly all eyes turned toward her. Kara leaned in. "You don't have to." Amelia sat for a moment, then stood. The microphone was passed to her like a torch, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she began. When people hear the word betrayal, they imagine fire, rage, destruction. But sometimes betrayal feels quiet. It feels like watching someone paint a version of you that doesn't exist, and then selling it as truth. That was the beginning of my undoing, but also the start of my becoming. Her voice was calm, unwavering. She spoke for 10 minutes, not just about Nathaniel, but about what it meant to reclaim authorship over one's own narrative. When she sat down, the room remained still before erupting in applause. That night, a video clip from the panel was posted by a journalist in the audience. It spread fast. #RebuildHer trended again, not because of scandal, but because of grace. People weren't just watching Amelia anymore. They were listening, and from that moment forward, she stopped hiding. Over the next few months, Amelia received invitations from universities' conferences, and even policymakers wanting to better understand emotional fraud. But she was careful with her voice. She used it not to relive her past, but to create space for others to rewrite theirs. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Rhodes had disappeared from the public eye. Vow Connect was quietly sold to another tech company at a fraction of its previous valuation. Nathaniel reportedly moved abroad, though no one could confirm exactly where. Some said Switzerland. Others believed he had checked into a private rehabilitation center. But for Amelia, his location no longer mattered. What mattered was the impact, and the way her act of truth-telling had created ripples far beyond what she had imagined. At the Rebuild Her studio, workshops filled quickly. They expanded into storytelling retreats, design residencies, and business mentorships for women rebuilding after toxic partnerships. Cara began training other facilitators. Leo became a constant presence, designing a garden space behind the studio that soon bloomed with native flowers and walking paths. On Amelia's birthday, he gave her a wooden bench he had built himself. It had her initials carved into the side, followed by the word still. She understood what it meant. Despite everything, still here, still growing, still herself. One evening, as a thunderstorm rolled across the hills, Amelia and Leo sat on that bench, watching the sky shatter into flashes of light. She turned to him and said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if none of it had gone wrong? If I had married him?" Leo didn't rush to answer. Then he said, "I think you would have survived it, but I don't think you would have thrived. And you deserve to thrive." She looked at him, saw no agenda in his eyes, no calculation, just truth. And for the first time in years, she let herself lean into it. Not because she needed saving, but because she was done carrying everything alone. Later that month, Rebuild Her was approached by a publishing house. They wanted to turn Amelia's journey into a book. She declined twice, but after speaking with Cara and Leo, she reconsidered. "Only if I get to write it myself," she said. "No ghostwriters, no edits to soften the sharp parts." They agreed. The manuscript took 6 months. The title was simple, The Vow I Made. And it wasn't a story about revenge. It was about clarity. The chapters covered more than the wedding. They spoke of identity, self-worth, the slow violence of manipulation, and the quiet revolution of choosing peace over performance. When the book was released, it sold out in 3 days. Not because of fame, but because women saw themselves in her words. Amelia began receiving letters, handwritten ones, typed ones, messages from every corner of the world. One from a lawyer in Brazil, one from a nurse in Ohio, One from a woman in her 60s who had just ended a 30-year marriage. They all said the same thing in different ways. Thank you for showing us that walking away is not failure, it's freedom. Rebuild Her began partnering with shelters and counseling centers. Their impact spread beyond what Kara or Amelia had ever dreamed. And yet, through all the momentum, Amelia remained grounded. She still walked the lake trail each morning, still kept a sketch pad by her bed, still planted flowers with Leo every spring. Her life was no longer loud, but it was full. And one day, nearly 2 years after the non-wedding, she received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single page. Amelia, I understand now. Not everything, but enough. I hope someday I can become someone who means well and does no harm. Thank you for making your truth visible. It made mine impossible to ignore. No signature. But she didn't need one. She folded the letter, placed it in a drawer with others like it, and went back outside. The air smelled like rain. The studio buzzed with soft voices preparing for a new group arrival. Kara waved from the porch. Leo emerged from the greenhouse, his shirt streaked with soil. Amelia smiled. She was not just healed, she was whole, not because of what had been taken from her, but because of what she had chosen to build in its place. And in that choice, she had found something rare, not victory, not fame, but the quiet joy of a life reclaimed. 6 months after the book release, Amelia stood at the front porch of the studio, sipping her tea as the early morning mist rolled through the garden. The scent of lavender and fresh soil lingered in the air, mingling with the hum of distant voices. Inside the newest Rebuild Her group was gathered in the common room, already engaged in soft conversations and hesitant laughter. Each woman who entered that space carried invisible weights. Some had endured betrayal, others gaslighting, and many had simply lived too long as background characters in their own lives. Amelia didn't need to ask their stories. She saw it in their posture, their eyes, the careful way they took up space. Healing wasn't always loud. Sometimes it began with silence, with showing up. That morning, Kara walked out holding 2 envelopes. One was from a donor, the other from a former participant. Amelia took the second one first. It was a thank you note, handwritten and creased. The woman inside had left an engagement with a man who never raised his voice, but had silenced her with expectations. The note ended with one sentence that stuck. You gave me permission to listen to myself. Amelia folded the letter, holding it a moment longer before placing it in the growing stack inside her drawer. Kara raised the second envelope. This one's from the grant committee. We're in, fully funded, national expansion, 3 new studios, 1 in New York, 1 in Austin, 1 in Seattle. Amelia didn't react immediately. She let the words settle into her chest, where her fear and hope often wrestled for room. Then she smiled. We'll need more benches. Kara grinned. You know Leo already started building them. Of course he had. Leo was the quiet architect behind everything Amelia now called home. He wasn't a man of grand gestures. He fixed hinges before she noticed they squeaked. He built furniture while humming under his breath. He never once tried to outshine her. He simply stood beside her, always the same height emotionally, never taller, never smaller. They hadn't labeled what they were. No proposals, no ultimatums. Just 2 people choosing each other every day, not for what they needed, but for who they were when together. One afternoon, while they were painting a new sign for the upcoming Seattle studio, Leo paused. You know you never talk about what you want next, for yourself, not the foundation, not the women we help. You. Amelia dipped her brush into a soft shade of blue. I used to think I wanted recognition, then I wanted distance. Now I think I just want to keep choosing peace. Leo nodded, his hands streaked with color. Then let's build around that. A few weeks later, they traveled to San Francisco. Amelia hadn't been back since the non-wedding. The city still hummed with energy and edges, but she saw it differently now. Not as a place of betrayal, but as a chapter that had served its purpose. They visited the old hotel. It had changed ownership. The lobby redesigned the ballroom, now used for conferences instead of ceremonies. She stood in the center of that space, remembering her footsteps echoing against marble floors. As she walked away from the life she thought she needed, it felt smaller now, not because it was less grand, but because she had grown. Leo didn't ask if she was okay. He knew. That evening, they sat on the rooftop of a small cafe, watching the sun melt into the bay. Amelia turned to him, the wind playing with strands of her hair. I think I'm ready. For what? For whatever's next, whatever we build. Leo reached into his backpack and pulled out a small box, not a ring box, something softer, wrapped in linen. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a compass. You don't need anyone to guide you, he said, but I hope you always know you're not walking alone. Amelia's throat tightened. It wasn't a proposal, it was a promise, and it meant more than any vow she had once been expected to recite. They returned to Oregon energized, grounded. The Seattle studio opened with more participants than expected. The model worked because it wasn't about fixing anyone. It was about reminding them they had always been whole. One day, Amelia received a message from Nathaniel's mother. It was formal, brief, and respectful. She wrote that Nathaniel was still out of the public eye, working in financial consulting for a small firm, that he had read Amelia's book, that he had sent her a letter he never mailed. She offered to forward it only if Amelia wanted. Amelia sat with the message for days. Then with a calm heart she replied, "Thank you for the message. I hope he continues to grow. But I have no need to revisit what I've already healed from." She never received a reply, but she didn't need one. Closure didn't always arrive in words. Sometimes it was the absence of reaction, the ability to move forward without needing to look back. Later that month, during a retreat bonfire, one of the younger women asked Amelia what she would say if she could go back to her former self, standing outside that hotel door. Amelia smiled into the firelight. "I'd tell her you're not losing everything. You're gaining clarity, and it will change you in ways you can't yet imagine." And maybe, she added after a pause, I'd thank her for listening. That night, as the stars spread themselves across the sky, like truths finally spoken, Amelia lay beside Leo in their modest cabin. The sounds of the forest wrapped around them like a lullaby. She stared at the ceiling, thinking of all the vows she hadn't made, the paths she hadn't walked, and how not choosing them had brought her exactly where she belonged. In a world obsessed with dramatic endings and loud revenge, Amelia had chosen something quieter, something deeper. Her victory wasn't viral. It was visible in the women who now walked taller, in the art hung on studio walls, in the pages of her book dog-eared by strangers who saw themselves between the lines. Her story hadn't ended at the altar, it had started there, and each step away from it had been a vow to herself, one she kept, one she would keep forever. 1 year later, on a quiet summer morning, Amelia stood in the garden behind the original Rebuild Her studio, watching as a new group of women arrived for the weekend retreat. Each carried something unseen, some invisible weight, some version of heartbreak not yet named. She welcomed them with a soft smile and a warmth that had no performance in it. The studio had grown beyond anything she had imagined, not in size but in depth. It had become a living space of restoration, not only for others, but for herself. Leo walked out carrying a tray of mugs filled with tea, nodding to each woman with the same steady calm that had first drawn her to him. Kara leaned against the porch railing, reading through the agenda for the day. From the outside, it looked simple, unremarkable even. But Amelia knew what it took to create a place where people felt safe enough to unravel. That afternoon, after the first workshop ended, Amelia sat at her desk, writing thank you notes to the donors who had supported their scholarship program. She paused as she reached for a new card, her eyes falling on a framed photograph beside her lamp. It was not a picture of her and Leo, nor was it of the studio or the garden. It was a photograph of the dress she never wore, a reminder not of pain, but of choice, of the moment she decided that her life would no longer be an accessory to someone else's ambition. She placed her pen down and walked outside where the sun had begun to dip, casting golden light across the field. Leo was planting new lavender along the path, his hands in the soil, his shirt damp with effort. She joined him kneeling beside him without speaking. He looked at her, his smile quiet and familiar. They worked in silence for a while until Amelia finally said, "Do you ever think about how different life could have been if I hadn't heard what I did that day?" Leo wiped his hands on his jeans, glanced at her, then at the sky. "I think life would have continued, but not like this, not with this clarity, not with this peace." She nodded. He was right. The life she had now wasn't born from perfection. It had been carved from the debris of something broken, and that made it more honest, more whole. That evening, during the closing circle with the women of the retreat, Amelia shared one last story. Not about Nathaniel or the scandal, not even about the studio. She spoke about trust, about how the most radical act of love was sometimes not towards others, but towards oneself. And how truth, no matter how painful, could become the first stone laid in the foundation of a life rebuilt with intention. The women listened, some with tears, others with closed eyes. One of them whispered, "You're the first person I've heard say it like that." Amelia smiled. "Then let this be your first reminder. You are not too late, you are not too broken, and you are not alone." As the women returned to their cabins, stars emerged above the treetops. Amelia stayed behind for a moment, looking up. No flashbulbs, no headlines, just the sound of crickets and the quiet knowledge that she had written her own ending, or maybe finally her own beginning. Because sometimes the most beautiful love story is not about being chosen by someone else. It's about choosing yourself, again and again, until that choice becomes home.